Sunday, and it's Chats with Charm. I am excited to see you guys. It's been like a couple weeks of a hiatus that I've taken from my new YouTube page, so it is high time. And I kind of wanted to do this YouTube chat video very intuitively. So I didn't really prepare a topic. I really wanted to kind of go with what my gut was saying. And what was coming up for me was confidence and doing things afraid, because we are getting ready to enter into a new year, and a lot of us have fears that are still holding us back from the life that we want to live. And we're all in it together. I say this not from a high horse, I say this right with you. I conquered a lot of fears this year that I'm still in the process of conquering. And when I say still in the process of conquering, sometimes as you accomplish something or you reach a goal or you face a fear, there might be a time where that fear kind of dissipates and it doesn't show up for you. And then there's times where that fear just like creeps back up and it's like, hiya, got you. And you're like, where did you come from and why are you here? Because I thought I had cleared you out of my energy. I thought I was in a better space. And here you come trying to just throw things off. So I just really wanted to speak into your lives, whoever needs to hear this right now, just to tell you that whatever it is that you're feeling like you can't do, you can. Our minds are something else. And I say this from experience of going to therapy and actively being in therapy and really making a commitment to myself this year to focus on myself, which I can confidently say I have accomplished. But our minds are something else. And a lot of times we have childhood stuff that comes up, things that somebody else deposited on us, things that somebody else brought from their own wounding and laid at our table and at our feet. And those same conversations and those same stories come up in our minds when we're trying to either accomplish a goal or get out of our comfort zone or do something that's completely challenging and different for us. And that opposition sometimes is, I don't even know if I want to say sometimes, that opposition is not a bad thing. That opposition feels yucky in our systems and in our bodies, especially when we're trying to do something. But sometimes that opposition is the exact push that we need, or it's the awareness that we need to say, hey, what is this and how can I give it the extra attention? Also, sometimes those voices that show up that aren't even ours are an opportunity for us to look at that and see where is that coming from and what's actually true for ourselves. My biggest struggle, as I say this, making a YouTube video, as I say this, having had my first paid speaking engagement this year, as I say this, for my natural hair brand, I go on IG Live every Sunday. My biggest struggle is using my voice. Using my voice has been my lifelong, area of growth so far in this journey. And I don't know what the next journey is going to take me to, because right now, instead of running from that fear, I've chosen in 2020 to face it. I've literally, since coming out the gate of 2020, put myself in situations to face that fear. And I just want to walk you guys through that experience and then kind of talk to you about whatever you may be experiencing right now. So in the beginning of the year, I told myself I wanted to use my voice more. And I think it was at the end of 2019, it might have been the beginning of 2020, I had went to church, and I go to One Church LA, and I went to church, and somebody prayed over me, and there were a lot of people walking up to the altar getting prayer, and it was a form of what's called intercessory prayer, when someone just prays for you, who they don't know your situation, they don't know your story, and they just pray for you. So somebody walked up to me. The woman did not know me, had never met me before, never really had seen her at church. And she put her hands on my heart and she whispered the prayer in my ear. And she was like, God, please let this woman start to use her voice, because there's a gift and a blessing tied to it. And I'm just in there boo-hoo crying, because I'm like, how the heck did she know the thing that I was struggling with? How did she know what I wanted to change or work on within myself. And of course, I tied it all being to that was from God. Like that was a message from God, and that I needed to hear, and that's something that I needed to understand was tied to my purpose. So I started to say after that, after going to church, that I was going to, after going to church that time, that I was going to be more intentional about focusing on that thing in me that's blocking me from using my voice. Because the one thing that I love to do is to connect with people through talking, but it's the one thing that I have the biggest challenge of doing. So in the beginning of the year, around February, end of February, or March, I ended up going to a speaking engagement. It was a just coffee shop poetry night. I say speaking engagement, but it was like a chill poetry night, open mic night. And I haven't done like spoken word in a very long time. When I was in college, I used to challenge myself and share my poetry, and like would go to whatever little small group events that they would have on campus and then share a poem. But this time I was in a room full of strangers at a open mic night, and the room was packed. This was, I would say it was February, because this was before COVID got crazy, and the lockdown, at least in Los Angeles, happened. So the lockdown happened in March, so it was the end of February, and I went there and I read a poem that was really vulnerable for me, because it was around a breakup and some pain that I was feeling. And I came out the gate swinging with something. I was the first one up. I assigned myself to be the first one to speak, and I came out the gate speaking about something that was very dear to me in my personal life, and not holding that back. I was very scared. I'm not gonna lie. I was shaking. I was nervous. I was replaying the poem in my head. I had it in my phone, and I was just so nervous. And I got on the mic in front of a room full of people, and I started to lose my voice as I was speaking, and I still pushed through, and I still finished that poem, and I still gave the best stage presence that I could, despite those feelings coming up for me. And I was so proud of myself after. And even though I was scared and it was super uncomfortable, and I could have been like, you didn't do your best, this was not, I was like, but what's my best when I'm challenging myself to do something I haven't done in 8 years? What's my best when I'm terrified to do this thing? My best is the fact that I signed up to go first and that I did the thing. And people were super loving, super supportive. No one was like, boo, she did a terrible job. I think in my mind that I did do a great job, and a lot of people told me the same thing. Now, I didn't go up there on like some spoken word, like, you know, my heart is this and this is the way I feel and blah blah. I'm making up a crap poem in my head. I couldn't think of nothing, but but just like going up there like spitting on some spoken word and stuff, and everybody's like, oh, that was good, sis. No. I read my poem, and I read from my heart, and I didn't try to, you know, animate it or put anything behind it. What was important for me was to just release that feeling that I needed to release from the words in that poem, and from the experience that I was having around that poem, and to use my voice. And I accomplished that goal. So that was the first step this year that I took in that direction. And then fast forward, I ended up doing a speaking engagement. So I ended up doing a paid speaking engagement, and I want to say that that was in April or May, and it was about mental health and wellness, and I was sharing my experiences as a business owner and balancing life as a business owner, and also having a full-time job, and also doing work on the back end for mental health. So being intentional about going to therapy, being intentional about just doing my own inner work, and how I was balancing all of that. Balancing, because we know balance is something that exists, but it's also something very challenging that we try to push so hard for. So I want to say, instead of balance, how I was like flowing through that. So that was my first like official paid speaking engagement. It wasn't my first opportunity at speaking in front of a group, but it was my first official paid speaking engagement. And I was very, very nervous, of course, before the engagement happened. I went through all my emotions of being like shaky and nervous and freaking out. But the blessing of COVID is that I was able to do it via Zoom. So I wasn't in a room full of people and having to get on stage, which was like my worst fear in the world. But instead, I was in the safe space of Zoom, and I felt a lot more confident because we did kind of like a walkthrough the weekend before. I had an outline of everything that I was going to say. I wrote it down, and I kind of like replayed that conversation and what I wanted to say before actually having the event. And I even wrote down some questions for myself that I could kind of ask myself in the conversation to kind of help prompt me to talk, because sometimes when I have to like spit fire ideas, I can get stuck, versus if someone asks me a question, then I'm like, okay, I can answer this. So by the time the event happened, I was in a great place. And one of the things that I did was I did some like kind of like just energy healing work before the actual event. So maybe 30 minutes before, I did a little bit of yoga, I lit some sage, I prayed, I just kind of did my own little routine to get my spirit right and get my energy in a good place so that I could show up in the best way possible for this event. And once the event started and I started talking about being a business owner and working a full-time job and also doing like the self-care work on the side, everything flowed. It was a small group of women that I was speaking to, and it felt super relatable because these were all women of color. And I rocked out, and it was awesome, and I felt so good after that. And it was like if I had a metaphorical jar of my goal for using my voice this year, that was another deposit into that jar. And regardless of how imperfect or perfect the actual event may have been, if I messed up on a word or anything, I didn't care. I just focused on the fact that this was something very challenging for me, and I just added a accomplishment into that gold jar. So again, fast forward throughout this year, and I thought, okay, now I need to start doing lives. One of my best friends gave me the idea of like, hey, you should start hopping on live, let people get to know you and your business. I have a natural hair care business, so I wanted people to get to know me, and I'm also going to drop a link to that in the comments if you're interested, and if you're into natural hair and taking care of healthy hair. That's like another business that I have, another passion that I have. So I was like, okay, I'm completely terrified of going on IG Live. What do you mean? I'm not about to go on IG Live. I'm like, that's super scary for me. That's super vulnerable. And I'm exposing myself to a bunch of strangers who could say some really mean stuff to me in the comments. And then the other thing was, what if no one watches? What if no one actually tuned in? So I had all these stories replaying in my head of why I wouldn't be able to do it. And a lot of that was also tied to those childhood things. Whenever I had an idea or there was something I really was excited about, being told like all of the reasons why I wouldn't be able to do it, or why it couldn't be possible, or why it couldn't happen, or even the criticism of, you could have did a better job, you didn't do this right. All of that criticism that I used to hear in my childhood started to show up for me before I even made the decision to do IG Lives. What changed for me was that I had like a scheduled interview. So somebody else who was in the natural hair care industry, she has a blog, she has a natural hair care product, and she was like, I want to interview you and I want to interview your brand. Let's hop on IG Live. That made it so much easier for me because she was asking me questions and I was able to answer those questions without feeling like that one-on-one pressure, which her Instagram audience was there. So that was kind of like my first introduction. After that, I did live sessions with our brand ambassadors, and then I started to do my own by myself live sessions, and I was nervous. And I would sit there like shaking and nervous. But then once I started talking, I noticed that I could speak very clearly and confidently once I got past those initial nerves. So I held space for myself to go past those initial nerves, and I scheduled okay, I'm gonna commit to this every Sunday to go live and to talk to my audience. And I don't care if no one tunes in, I'm still gonna go live. So here's my cup that I'm talking about of that goal. Every time I went live, every time I spoke, I was depositing something into that cup and building up my self-esteem and confidence around speaking and around using my voice. Now, yes, I did have like one setback. I had one setback because somebody said something rude on live and it just threw me off because I was already in my head prior to the live. Those stories of like, this is gonna go bad, I can't do it, I'm gonna be too afraid. All of that started showing up before the IG live. And then I had a moment that kind of confirmed those fears in the actual live, and I shut down the live. I started crying. I was like, I'm never going on live again, I'm never speaking again, I'm never doing this again. And my business coach, she walked me through that. Danny Fost, she is amazing, awesome business coach. I'm actually going to plug her in the comments as well. She's not only a business coach, but she is also a mindset coach, and she's great at just helping you with like your energy, your intention, manifesting, and just working within your power. So I talked to her and I talked to my best friend, and they were both like, you're not about to let this stop you. Like, don't let this stop you. Hold space for your feelings. Let's talk about the feelings, but then also let's keep going. Don't let anyone stop you from reaching your goal. And your goal is to be using your voice consistently this year. So I had the conversation, I did my crying, I let myself have my feelings about it, and then the following Sunday I went right back to it. And I started progressively getting more comfortable with hopping on live. It became a lot easier for me. Now when I hop on live, it's like I'm just talking to a group of friends and it's not an issue for me. But I still have those moments where those fears come up for me because like this is something I'm still working towards, and something that this year alone I started to really make a point to work through it. Now the funny thing is that I'm a business owner, and being a business owner, you have to do a lot of speaking, and then if you want to be the face of your brand, you are at the forefront of your brand. So this year was a big challenge in that area too, because I put myself out there having this brand and put my voice out there too in tandem with that. So like all the fears were showing up, and it was cool because me going to therapy this year and being really intentional about doing my inner work helped with the process of me having my business and then me using my voice consistently. So really proud of myself for that, because I kept depositing into my jar. So what I want to tell you is, whatever it is that you want to do, whatever goal that you have for 2021, and you are afraid to even take the leap to do it, you're afraid of what's going to be on the other side, you're afraid you won't be able to do it, and you have so many fears around it, do it. The one thing that you are super afraid of is usually the thing that you need to challenge yourself to do, because what's on the other side of that might be a blessing to someone else. What's on the other side of that could be increased confidence and self-esteem for yourself. What's on the other side of that could also be healing for yourself. There's so many things that are on the other side of it that fear is trying to block you from. But if you just take the opportunity and the chance to say, you know what, I'm going to dip my toe in and I'm going to give myself a try, and not beat yourself up for the outcome either, because it doesn't have to be perfect. Let it be messy. If your issue was using your voice, let your voice shake. Be nervous, let your hands shake, freak out if you need to. It's okay. I know that sounds like super vulnerable and super like, what the heck? But let yourself do that, because as you're doing it and then you continue to speak, you start to realize, oh, this is safe. It's safe. And I can be me. I can be vulnerable. I can be myself. And it's also safe. I think a lot of times the reason why we have fears around whether it's starting a business, whether it's using our voice, whether it's whatever big thing that we want to do, changing careers, a lot of times there's some fear around the vulnerability. What are people going to think? What are people going to say? What if it's not perfect? It doesn't have to be perfect. Life is not perfect, and one of the biggest things to know is that you have to start from somewhere. It's not always going to be clear, crystal cut, where you just out the gate became this amazing, talented person at whatever this is. For anybody that we have seen in life that is very successful or has reached the pinnacle of their talent or success, there were years of struggle before them. We just don't hear those stories enough, and we don't hear the in between, and we definitely don't hear the very beginning of how they were scared or nervous or worried, you know. And there are some people who just go into it very confident, but then if you're like me and you have, you know, things that you're working through your own trauma, your own whatever is going on in your past and your childhood, then sometimes those challenges feel a little bit heavier. One example I want to give you guys before I close out is I used to be really terrified of flying, like very, very terrified, to the point where I would have anxiety attacks before getting on the plane. I would have an anxiety attack on the plane. Like I would just be so scared and just try to keep flying to a minimum. So I did the biggest challenge possible. In 2015, I moved to South Korea, and I had never been on an international flight. This flight was 12 hours from Los Angeles to South Korea, and I was freaking out. I didn't know what to expect on an international flight. I was like, what if this plane goes down? Like, I'm gonna die and I won't even make it to Korea. Like, all these thoughts were coming into my head, and I started to build out a routine. So as soon as I actually got on the plane, I started listening to just some like motivational, inspirational stuff. And I think at the time I was listening to TD Jakes, just to help ground myself. I prayed, and I was still freaking out, so I was just drinking a lot of wine on that flight. And then once I got to Korea and made it through the flight and survived, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna challenge myself even more to travel a little bit more. So I started booking more flights and traveling more, doing more travel by myself. And I would get on the plane and I would still have those fears and still be praying and holding on to the seat real tight, but I still challenged myself to fly. So then towards the end of my year that I taught in Korea, I traveled to like 4 different countries in a small period of time. It was Bali, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. And I went on the plane and I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't anxious. I was ready. I was like, oh, I'm excited about this flight. I'm ready. Like, because I had deposited into that cup of my goal so many times without judgment of how I showed up. And it made it so much easier for me towards the end that one day I just got on the plane and I wasn't scared. And today it is so easy for me to fly. Now when I get on a plane, my butt falls asleep. He passed out within 10 minutes. I wake up, we're in midair, and I'm like, okay, hey. Now, I still get nervous when there's turbulence because no one likes turbulence. And, you know, I play that story in my head of like, plane's about to go down, blah, blah. But then I do like my breathing techniques, do whatever I need to do to calm myself and remind myself like, girl, you've done this many times before. You are protected. God's got you. You're going to make it safely. And then I calm my nervous system back down and I'm able to go back to sleep basically, because that's usually what I do on planes now. But before I would be super hyper awake, hyper vigilant. And I realized when I was flying, and I don't know if this was like my last international flight, because my last international trip was to South Africa, and that was like 20 hours, 10 to get to Europe and then 10 to get to South Africa. And I remember being in the plane and being like, you gotta let go of this control. You gotta let go of whatever it is that you're trying to hold on, and you think that by holding on tight and putting your body through all this like hyper vigilance and fear and tightness, that it's gonna stop whatever outcome could possibly be. It's not. Let go, let God, trust that, you know, whatever you wanna call it, the universe, your spirit guides, God, Yahweh, like whoever you wanna call it. For me, I say it's my Father, it's my Creator, and I just was like, I need to let go and trust that I'm gonna be protected. And once I started to let go and trust, that's when the fear let go. And then I started to invite joy behind flying. So that's the same thing that's been true for using my voice and speaking, especially doing lives. I still get nervous, but each time I start to deposit into that cup, and then I start to let the fear go away. And as the fear starts to release, because I'm doing an act that even if I don't feel it in my body, it's the act of saying I'm letting this go. That act alone is enough to know that one day And this has happened recently. I've gotten on live and I wasn't afraid at all. But one day, as I use my voice, I'm not going to be afraid of at all. And y'all are going to see me on stage speaking, because I cannot wait to do that. My dream is to be on stage speaking and sharing my truth and connecting with people and inspiring and motivating them, because I think that we are all capable of so much. But once we get past those fears, we can do it. So do it afraid. 2021, do it afraid. Let that be your theme. Life is really, really short. And we learned in 2020 how short it is. 2021, do it afraid. Get out there. Do it shaking. Do it with your voice quivering. Try not to judge yourself. Have self-compassion so that every little try starts to deposit in that cup. And that's all I've got for you. If this resonated with you, please drop a comment and please subscribe and support. I am a newbie channel, so I am growing, but I would love for you guys to subscribe and to join me every week when I share. And if you have any special topics you would love for me to cover, please drop that in the comments too. All right, thank you guys and happy Sunday.